I think, Judy, it was in your living room that I had my first conversation about Leaside CFUW, probably in 2003 or 4. So you've been at this a long time, and I really appreciate the work that you all do. I was at the North Toronto group a couple of weeks ago, and some of you heard me speak there, so this is going to be very repetitive, but the conversation will probably be different. I also want to acknowledge Stephanie, who is the member and was at the legislature till like 7 o'clock tonight. So if you need to leave, I'm not going to be insulted. Okay, so I just want you to know because it's a lot. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing happening in terms of, you know, the whole anti-woke, we're going to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to turn the clock back to a simpler time, and we got all mixed up with identity politics. And with that movement, I think what we're seeing is a renewed permission for misogyny, is what I'm going to talk about, just because of being a woman in a leadership role, or having been a woman in a leadership role. But I think there's a renewed permission for homophobia, transphobia, for racism, for ableism. I think there's a whole lot going on right now. You know, the changes that are being made in education by the province are going to disadvantage the most vulnerable kids in the system. And it's a female dominated profession. And I think that there is a deep lack of respect for education coming from the government right now. So, and that's not specific just to Ontario. I think we're seeing that happen in other parts of the country, certainly other parts of the world. I think the defeat of Viktor Orban is probably a bright light in terms of the future, but we have a long way to go, and we've gone a long way back, I think. So what I want to do is I want to just tell you a little bit about my path, and in doing that, land where I think we are today. So I had the experience this morning of delivering a letter. I live in Alliston now. So we moved from North Toronto in the middle of the pandemic, and we live in a property outside of Alliston, just near the Sheldon Outdoor Ed Center. And I know. So I took a letter to the director and the supervisor of the Toronto District School Board this morning to let them know that the people in the Sheldon area are very concerned, not about the land, although the land is beautiful, but we live out there, and most of the people who live there have property. That's not the issue. The issue is that the Sheldon Outdoor Ed Center provides an opportunity for kids from downtown Toronto to go and see the stars and have a couple of nights in the wilderness, in the bush. And so that people are very concerned about it closing. But I had this flashback of my entire career, because that's kind of where I started, was trying to keep outdoor ed centers and pools and keep the education system on track. So, I also know that all of you talk to young women in your lives, talk to young people in your lives. And I think that we need to be realistic about what's going on in terms of kids' aspirations. And a year ago, I talked with a group of first-year Victoria College students, where I teach a first-year program, and I taught to the Vic 1 cohort about the subject of women in politics. And at that time, it seemed to make sense that it was something that we needed to continue to explore. And I think that that is even more true today, given the re-election of Donald Trump, because his behavior and his ideology are so dangerous to women. I mean, they're dangerous to everything. But I think that the way his policies and his attitude and his demeanor are kind of eating away at civility is really putting a chill on the advancement of women, on people of color, LGBTQ plus people, people with disabilities, anyone who, once again, is not a straight white male. I think that's where the clock's being turned back. So while now the context has shifted a bit and the issues like this one seem to pale in the face of the existential threat that we're confronting as a country. Should we be talking about the big things? But to me, this is a fundamental. The way we treat each other and the way women are treated is fundamental. I mean, you're talking about supporting and understanding and giving money to women in Afghanistan. And so, we need to make sure that we're taking care of what's going on here as well. Last year, as part of the Democracy Exchange Summit, which is going on right now, actually in Toronto, Timothy Snyder was a keynote speaker, and some of you will know that Timothy Snyder is the author of On Tyranny and On Freedom, and he's one of the 3 Yale professors who has relocated to Toronto. He talked about On Freedom as an answer to the questions raised in On Tyranny. And he talked about that we have to have something to organize around, that not just freedom from something, but freedom to do something. That's how he talks about freedom. And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it, because if we just react, we'll eventually become tired and disenchanted. And that freedom is being for things. It's about our commitments and our affirmations to each other. And he talks about empathy as being at the core of all of that. We need facts and millions of little truths he talks about. We can't be reasonable people without a constant flow of factuality. And he ended on a note of optimism that we all have the tools to address the challenges facing the world, but that we have to see the future again. And I think when we listen to the news right now, sometimes it's hard to get a bead on what the future looks like. That's any kind of optimistic, bright place. So I think that's our task at the moment. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about my particular journey, and then maybe we can turn back to the current context. So is this the advance? No. Which is the little button? Oh, is it just this one? There we go. Okay. So just to locate myself, so that's me on the right. I'm the eldest of 4 girls. I think my mother was holding the baby or taking the picture or something at that point with the 4th. And I grew up in Richmond Hill, but this is actually 15 Bayview Ridge Crescent, which is just at York Mills and Bayview, and that is my dad on the left. He was a GP in Richmond Hill for 45 years. My grandfather next to him was a GP in North Toronto from 1923 or so until 1952, and then that's my grandma. And then on the right is my Uncle Arthur, who was the head of biochemistry at U of T. But my grandma was a teacher she started teaching in 1907 in Northern Ontario. She was teaching in Thessalon and in Sault Ste. Marie. And she was an orphan. My mom was an orphan. So I grew up in a family where women made it on their own one way or another. And being the eldest of 4 girls, that was my expectation, that we would figure out a way to do it. And I didn't have any brothers, so I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to know how to do things. I always feel sorry for people with brothers, because they learn early on that there's certain things they're not supposed to do. I just include this picture because the 3 of us were born 3 in 3 years, and we always used to laugh, kid my dad, did he not know how it happened? But I was the eldest child, and these were my people. So I never wanted to dwell on the ways that my path to political office and the premier's chair might have been more challenging than that of a straight white man's. I think it's pretty obvious from the names of the first 24. I'm the 25th premier, but the names of the 23, 24 before me and the 26, there's a definite pattern in Ontario, and the same goes for every province and territory. So as the 25th premier, first woman, first openly gay person to sit in that chair, I definitely didn't fit the mold, but that was not something I talked about a lot. And because of that, lots of people, young and old, men and women, ask me what the journey has been like for me, and what it's like to be the first woman, first gay person. And I think it's important to all of us that we hear the answers to those questions, that we talk to each other about how we got here. I had no grand plan to enter politics, provincial politics, or any politics. Mike Harris unwittingly encouraged me to move from local education politics. I always say Mike Harris made me. He made me do it. That's right. So he encouraged me to move from local education politics to the provincial realm. Sheila Ward, who was a good friend and a former school board trustee, showed me how to enter and become a member of the Liberal Party of Ontario. She stood by my side. I was already a fan of Lynn McLeod's, but I had no party experience. And it's interesting, I'm reading a manuscript of a book that's being written about the Peterson years right now. And it's very interesting to think about the threads that have gone through the different premiers, and up until I think Mike Harris was elected, there were certain assumptions that we made about what the relationship was going to be between the provincial government and the education system, what the relationship was going to be between the provincial government and municipalities. And I'm not making a partisan comment. I just think that with the election of that government, things started to change. And, if we think about what was going on as well, whether it's Reagan or Thatcher, there was a change in the way we saw the relationship between government and the taxpayer. We had thought of ourselves as citizens, I think, and then we became taxpayers, and we became people who it was a more transactional relationship. And so I think that's what has been happening over the course of the last few decades. And so it was really what motivated me to get involved, because I felt that the social contract that I had grown up with was being changed. And I wanted to be involved in finding a way to, if I could, right guy. Now, obviously, that's a big thing, and there were forces other than just the government in Ontario, but that was where I was located. So what I believed then, and I believe now, is that there really is endless possibility in this province. And I know Stephanie's having the experience now of traveling the province on committee and working with people in different communities, and the diversity and the geography and the potential of this province is really quite amazing. And it's the thing that is the most privileged about being in political office, I think, is getting to understand what makes things work. So that's the big reason that I wanted to be involved, because I thought that we had so much potential. So the question of, was it harder for me than it was for a man, is really difficult to answer. It's exactly when people ask me that question about what it was like to be the first woman premier. And I know that they're asking about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated world, but many of you worked in male-dominated professions, And so the same prejudices that you experienced are what we experience in politics as well. It's the same thing. And I just had a little, those little things that happen, like when you're sitting at a meeting and there are a lot of men and there's some women, and a woman, or you come up with an idea and it kind of goes on. But then when a man comes up with the same freaking idea, all of a sudden it gets taken up. I was in a board meeting. I'm on a volunteer board of the Woodlands Cultural Center in Six Nations. And I was in a meeting, and it was all women and one man. And, you know, we had been talking, and he had not indicated that he wanted to talk. And then all of a sudden he said, well, if I could just get a word in edgewise. Oh, it's like, so, you know, we all understand what those comments mean. And so I don't know what it's like not to deal with that stuff. I don't know what it's like to walk into a room and be the tallest person, unless it's an elementary class of money. I don't know what it's like to walk on the street at night alone and feel completely safe, because I don't know what it's like to use underground parking lots at night, because I don't do that, you know. I don't know what it's like to be able to lift any piece of furniture in my house, and I don't know what it's like to be able to get dressed for work, only having to worry about what color tie you choose to wear. Because I just don't have the lived experience of a man. So it's really hard to do that comparison of what it's like to be the first woman when I've never been a premier as a man. So I didn't dwell on it. None of any of those things made me upset. They were just the reality. They were the reality I'd grown up with. But what did get in the way for me all through my life, and I think for a lot of people in this room, is that those differences made us less than in the eyes of the system or the eyes of the status quo. And that did and does make me angry. And it does make me angry that I'm nearly 73 and we're having this conversation again. And I thought in 1971, when I graduated from high school, that we were going to be a lot farther along, that we weren't going to have this conversation, that I wasn't going to have to worry about my granddaughters feeling the same way, you know, saying things like, oh, the boys always think they know everything and they just talk the loudest. You know, I thought it was going to even out differently, and it hasn't. So that worries me a lot. So I know that there are, I know what it's like to be left out because of being a girl. I relearned that lesson when I came out when I was 37. So then I learned what it was like to, you know, have women in the neighborhood cross the street when Jane and I were coming along. So the academic notion of homophobia became real when those things started to happen. And they didn't last long, but there was definitely a shift. I also know that there were lots of people who saw barriers and reminded me that they were there along the way as I was going through my political career. When I first ran for the school board in 1994, there were lots of people, including members of my own United Church, who told me that it was inappropriate for a lesbian to run for the school board. And at every all candidates meeting, I was confronted by parents with their children asking me about my morality. Kids on their hips, yeah. And my understanding is that that's exactly how homophobia works, you know, that's how it works. It just eats away at your confidence, so that's what it tries to do. But it was hilarious that in my first campaign as a school trustee in 1994, which I lost by 72 votes, there was a pamphlet that went around calling me an extremist lesbian. Yes, lesbian, extremist, no. So, but I was ultimately elected to the school board in 2000. But there was homophobia in every one of my campaigns. I remember in 2002, starting the campaign when we were finally elected in 2003, but I would knock on doors and people would come to the door and say, oh, you're the one who lives outside the riding with her girlfriend. So that was what our opposition was talking about. There were people who suggested that Jane and I maybe move to a downtown riding, maybe move to Riverdale, because I guess there were more lesbians in Riverdale. I said, we're not doing that. But my point is that I fear that right now, at this moment in our history, there is a renewed permission for that misogyny, racism, homo and transphobia has taken off in terms of a way into those discriminations. And these are things that many of us in this room have been working on for more than 50 years to try to make our society more inclusive and more, and to implement change. So when I was elected leader in 2013, and I had, I had dealt with people saying to me, well, please don't run for leader because you can't be the premier, because you won't be elected as the premier. I did win the leadership, and this was one of the cartoons that depicted the state that the party was in. Now, they got the logo wrong. That's actually the federal logo, but whatever. But when I was elected in 2013, there was an unprecedented number of women. Oh, I put this slide in just because this was I'm going to say cartoon that ran in the Toronto Sun. I think it was in the 2014 election. And it was the Toronto Sun got a lot of pushback because it was such a violent image. But it ran nonetheless. And I can remember feeling shocked when I saw it in the morning. So yeah, but we managed to get through it. So this is in Niagara-on-the-Lake, 2013, and there were 6 of 13 premiers who were women in 2013, and it was a moment, it was pretty exciting. We were different party stripes, we had different life experiences and very different styles. Pauline Marois was the premier of Quebec, and she's standing right beside me. She was the member of the party leader of the Parti Québécois, Christy Clark. Kathy Dunderdale was the premier of Nova Scotia, and Alison Redford was the premier of Alberta, and that is Ava Avarat, I think, who was the premier of Nunavut. Kathy Dunderdale tells a very funny story of after she lost, she would go into grocery stores, and the experience of people kind of looking at you. But one day, one woman said to her, "Didn't you used to be Kathy Dunderdale?" I love that. Anyway, it was remarked that there were 6 of 13 of us. And I guess, I thought about this a lot, whether the decisions that we took at that meeting would have been different without all of us there. I think they would have been. Would we have reached an agreement to support the National Indigenous Organization's call for an inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women? Maybe, but I don't think so. Because when I sat around that table, and we know that if you have 30% of women at a table, decisions change, different issues are discussed, and different decisions are made. And I can remember sitting around that table, and it was the women who were first in to join the call of the Indigenous leaders for an inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. We also we laid the groundwork for a Canadian energy strategy. Now, did it get picked up in the future? No, but we came to an agreement, even with Alison Redford from Alberta there, and we were able to come to agreement. So there's a lot of research that would suggest that the outcome of conversations is different depending on whether there's critical mass of women there. What I can say is that not one of that 6 was able to be reelected to form government. And that is, if you have a chance to listen at any point to the podcast, No Second Chances, Kate Graham put it together, and she interviewed all the women who had been first ministers in this country. At that point, everyone was alive. She interviewed Kim Campbell and all the premiers. I think there have been 16 or 17 of us now. And every single one of us. Christy Clark was reelected, but she didn't get a majority, and then she lost government. So parties tend to, you saw that picture of the car, the jalopy that it was perceived I had inherited. And there's a lot of, there's a pattern of women being elected when the party's either going down the tubes or has started to go down. And that, you know, who knows? It's like, we're not doing well, so let's try a girl. Let's see if that works. But we're going to, you know, we will turn that around, but so far that is not what has happened. And right now, there are 3 women, Danielle Smith of Alberta, Elizabeth Holt in New Brunswick, and now the new leader of the CAQ, the Coalition Avenir Québec, Christine Frechette, 3 women. At the time in 2013, there were media who were asking us, you know, is this a turning point now? Are we now on a path where there's always going to be more of an even split between women and men? And to a woman, we said, we don't think so. We think that this is an anomaly, and we're going to see backsliding, and that's exactly what happened. So I'm going to tell you just a quick anecdote about the issue of being women in leadership. And I think that it's different for all of us, but this encounter happened shortly after I'd been sworn in as premier in the North Toronto neighborhood where I lived, up on Fairlawn Avenue. I can't remember where I was going, but I was walking down the sidewalk, and presumably my security detail was somewhere there. But I stopped to talk to a friend who I'd known for, you know, over 35 years. Our kids went to school and church together. And this encounter was about how we see leadership. And in the 2014 election, the Toronto Star did a little exercise where they had a bunch of people draw their picture of a leader, and everyone drew a man. So leadership meant male, and it meant a particular kind of experience. So I was talking to this guy. He had been a progressive conservative all his life, but since 1995, and he was in education, so he had switched over to the Liberals, but he'd been a supporter of mine. We were friends. We had mutual friends from the past, and we shared a worldview. And I say all that just to make it clear that the comment he made to me was not in any way malicious or intended to wound. What he said was a casual comment coming out of his experience of politics in Canada and Ontario. We were talking about the political situation in the province, and he looked at me kind of in a bemused way and exclaimed how amazing it was that I was premier because I was just a mom. That was what he said. And, you know, he didn't mean it in a negative, I mean, he didn't mean it to hurt me, but it was just it was a whole lot of things wrapped up in one. So I was a woman. You know, from his perspective, I didn't have 3 university degrees. I was a mom. That's what I did. And that was my job. That was my role. And that's not someone who could rise to the highest office in the province. That was his perspective. And, you know, so I had, against all odds, not because I had made a plan when I was 25 to be the premier, but because circumstances had allowed me, and good people had been part of the team. I mean, you know, you don't do things by yourself. You do them with a team. And so but that exchange doesn't mean I bear him any malice. It didn't mean, and I also didn't challenge him in the moment because that wasn't the point. But it just meant people like me do not become premier. I wasn't a man, I wasn't a lawyer, I wasn't wealthy, I wasn't well connected. I hadn't spent my life in politics because really until I got involved after I'd run for the school board in '94, I hadn't been a card-carrying member of a party, so I hadn't grown up in a political party. My natural home was with the Liberals, but that's not where I had been. So I was not the profile of an aspiring political leader, and obviously I was helped along the path by so many people. But I think it's important that we remember that those images are in people's heads. And as we see those equity programs being diluted, and we see the kind of vicious attack on wokeism, which has been my work for 50 years to try to make the world a more equitable place. We have to remember that those images, they have been in people's heads for a long time, and I think they are being reinforced again. So I really believe that inequality, and the way it played out in my own life and in our community fueled my worldview. It formed my activism. And so by the time I got to be premier, we were working to take measures that would address that inequality. That for me was why I was in politics, was to try to level the playing field a bit more. I thought education was the most important thing that we can do to level the playing field. I still believe that publicly funded education is the most important thing we do as government, as a community. But there were other things that I believed we needed to do. So, for example, when we were first in office in 2013, when I was premier, we brought forward a budget that took measures to address specifically more funding for personal support workers and developmental support workers and early childhood educators, who were all female-dominated sectors. We put more money into violence against women service providers and funding for thousands of childcare spaces and minimum wage increases. All of those things, in my mind, were specifically targeted at populations that did not have access to power, did not have access. When I looked in 2013 at the trajectory of the salary increases over the past decade of male-dominated, so firefighters and police officers, the trajectory was right up, straight up. But those developmental support workers and PSWs, it was like it was flatline. They had not seen the kind of exponential increases. So making those decisions was very much came out of my experience. And so I think we have made an enormous amount of progress in politics and obviously in other parts of our society. But I just don't think we can kid ourselves that we don't have more work to do. So these are some of the facts that continue to drive me. So 3.3% of TSX-listed Canadian companies have women CEOs. Women still make up less than 40% of elected representatives in Canada, and the work that Equal Voice does is about trying to recruit more women. And I'll just say something about that when I'm talking to groups of young women, if I think of myself 20 years ago when I was talking to young women, I think it's not that I was sugarcoating, but I think I gave a different message. I think I said, this is what we're working on. We're making progress. We're going to get there. Things are changing. And, we need to just keep driving forward. And what I think we have to say is, look, we've been at this a long time. And we're taking some steps backwards. And I can't promise you that in the next 10, 20 years, it's all going to change. But what I can promise you is that it's worth doing it. It's worth stepping in. It's worth putting your hand up. It's worth putting yourself in a situation where you may feel uncomfortable, but you've got something to add. And it's worth when you're sitting. I talk to some of my students because they come to me and ask me, how do they go forward? How do they get into politics? And one of the things I say to them is, put yourself in situations where you aren't necessarily comfortable, and then listen to your gut. And when you feel that sense that you've got something to say, try to push yourself to say it, because I think there are a lot of young people, and I see it in my classes, who hold back to a far greater degree than I would have expected in 2026. And so I think that it's like we need to practice that muscle of, or we need to, I don't think anybody in this room probably holds back, but there are young women who I think do hold back more than some of us do. And so we need to find ways to give them permission to step out and to speak up, because I think they're feeling discouraged, you know? I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them. There's pressure in terms of, if I think about the education system, there's pressure on them in terms of getting very high grades. There's pressure in terms of what are they going to do when they get out of the education, out of school. And then when they get out, are they going to have a shot? You know, and then there are these movements that are more insidious even than the anti-woke movements. They're the movements about the traditional wife, and this notion that somehow we can go back to some rose-colored time when everything was okay. You know, when people talk to me about the good old days, particularly, it's hilarious, isn't it? Particularly in the context of education, you know, I will say to them, like, I'm old enough now, I can say, they might have been old, but they were not good, because there were so many people falling through the cracks, and we just, as a society, we just let that happen. And I think that there's a chance we're going to do that again. So, you know, pay equity is still not where it needs to be. There's still so much violence. Every 6 days, a woman's killed by her intimate partner. This one, that girls leave sports by 14 at twice the rate of boys. That may seem like a bit of an anomalous one, but there's a very high percentage of women in leadership positions who have competed in sports at a high level and did not drop out when they were 14, and have pushed themselves in terms of their physical strength. Anorexia, girls struggle with it at 3 times the rate of boys and men. And I know that there's an increase in terms of young men in their body image, and that being a problem, but there's still much more so for young women. And the scrolling on TikTok and social media has not helped that at all. And you know, I keep having these conversations with my granddaughters, and Claire in particular, who's 14, she kind of rolls her eyes because I go on a rant about cosmetic surgery and the pressures on young women to change their faces to fit some mold that goodness knows who has decided is the one that we're supposed to. So I just think there are lots of issues around body image. Intimate partner abuse at twice the rate of men. And of course, women are more likely than men to live on low income. So a lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. And I think that if we don't push back, we who are now old enough, many of us in this room, most of you are younger than I am, but some of you are not. And so we have the freedom now. To put what's happening now in context, you know? And I think for young people, it's important to hear that what some of the things that are happening are not okay. And some of the things that are being said by our leaders are definitely not okay. And even, you know, I will say in terms of Mark Carney, who I think is doing a great job, and I'm very happy. However, you know, when he came out and said, we're not going to have feminist foreign policy, it was like, why say that? Why do we have to say that? Why do we have to weaponize that word? And why can we not just continue to have decent and civilized and compassionate foreign policy? Why do we have to call out that we've gone too far? And you know, some of the attitudes around the previous government, if you listen to people talk about what Trudeau did or didn't do, and you know, he didn't do anything and it was all negative. There are thousands of women in this country who have childcare for their children that they did not have before Justin Trudeau put that program in place. There are women living in poverty who can get their teeth attended to, which is a huge thing, you know? So I think we have to push back against some of the received wisdom that's floating around right now, because it is very harmful and it is fueling this sort of backwards slide. So we've got a lot more to do. We are right to celebrate the progress that we've made for sure. And we are right to continue to fight. And we are right to encourage each other to continue. You know, I'm here tonight because this conversation is important. And it's important in this room, and it's important in all the rooms that we find ourselves in. If I go back to Snyder's words on freedom and the notion that we actually have the tools to do something, we actually do, no matter what the news says, no matter how hopeless it feels, we do have the tools to do something, to work within the constraints of our lives, to be constructive, as opposed to simply and only rebel against something. We actually, and you guys, the CFUW is a great example of an organization that year after year makes positive, constructive contributions to the community and to the political discourse. There are real constraints on women. That is just the fact. There always have been. We have not imagined them in our own lives. They are real, and they continue to be real. And at times we've railed against them. But I remember I sat in a women's studies course at OISE in the 90s, listening to women much younger than me talking about the imperatives of feminism and scoffing at the notion that it was possible to make progress outside the marches and the protests in downtown Toronto. I had 3 tiny kids at the time. I was working part-time, and I had absolutely no bandwidth to go to protests. And I like to think that we can all find ways to work within the constraints of our own lives to do something that is constructive, that is positive. And I think that right now that work is more important than it ever has been. So thank you very much. So can I ask? Oh, yeah. Ask questions? Okay. Yeah. Go back.
I know you're so concerned about education. Perhaps you noticed this week, a couple of days ago, there was an article in the Globe and Mail about the appalling situation. The washrooms in the schools.
I didn't see that. I've been preoccupied with railing about the education legislation that they put in, but yeah, just.
And
was it in the public schools in Toronto?
yes.
Oh, okay.
It was on the website.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Also, and then today, they're on the front page was absenteeism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I belong to a private club, which guys, the mushroom situation involves with that. Because they have very low-rise toilets and for older women.
You can't stand up.
Yeah. And I've been railing away. And finally I said to them, this is a female issue. It really is. The state of washrooms are a female issue for the most part. Men don't need to sit down. And I think if girls, for instance, if they're on their period or something, and they can't go to the washroom in a reasonable way, then they'd stay home, wouldn't they?
Yeah, washrooms.
So basic.
Yeah.
Washrooms are so important as a female issue.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's been progress in terms of providing period products for young women in the schools. But I think that there are 2 issues there. There's a facilities condition index or issue. So in terms of boards actually having the money to keep the washrooms in decent condition. So that is an issue. But there's also an issue of supervision, because washrooms are places that are often not safe for kids. And, in the Toronto board, we used to have a role called hall monitors. And some of you will remember. So it was a person, an adult, who was hired to, get to know the kids and walk in the halls and just be there. It was like a minister who in our church used to talk about ministry of presence, just being there and being available to kids to keep them safe. So I think it's a resourcing issue. And the height of the toilets is, that's a grown-up old woman issue, but yeah. I do think that there's a resource issue, and I think that there are other things even than just the bathrooms that are really, in some of the buildings that were built in 1926 in this city, they need a lot of work. So it's a big problem. Yes, that are specific to bathroom. There are issues for women, there are issues for trans kids, there are issues for gay kids. Yeah, there are bathroom issues for sure. Yeah, it's a good point. Yes.
You were talking about women finding their own voice, and I think that's one of the advantages of being older, is that you do finally find your voice. So it drives me crazy when in the press, they label us Karens. In other words, how dare we? We're Karens. It's not, it's a drug.
Absolutely.
Because we shouldn't be talking, the fact that we have more disposable income than any other demographic, and that finally we've decided we will speak up. Or they just describe you as elderly. They don't describe that person down south as geriatric elderly.
Insane.
Insane, like he said, frontal lobe dementia. And if you're a woman over 60, you've automatically lost your marbles.
Don't you think that's the language of misogyny?
Yes.
Yeah, it's ageism, but it's also misogyny, right? Yeah, and it's, I mean, I don't know when Karen started being a thing, but it's not that long ago. And yeah, that's right. It's just, you got no right to speak up. Yeah.
As soon as you turn 60, well, when are you retiring? They don't ask men that. You know, you can be CEO and you can be 75, 78, 90, whatever.
I mean, I think there's an issue. It's interesting. I think there's an issue. I'm glad John Tory, for example, decided not to run for mayor. I think there is an issue in terms of baby boomers and a little older stepping aside and letting the next generation come through. I mean, there's a Gord Krantz, who I know and I kind of like, is the mayor of Milton. He's 89 or 88, and he's going to run again. It's like, I don't think he should, you know? I think we have this role now, you know? People ask me if I'm going to run for office again. No, this is my job now. My job now is to have conversations and foster conversations, not to be in office and take the job of a 55-year-old, you know? Yeah, doesn't mean we don't deserve respect.
No.
One of the things that I'm really concerned about is the dismantling of school boards. And there's different aspects of that. One of the aspects is that this really affects women, because so many women get into politics by running for school board, for school trustee, and then they can go up to other levels, go to the city or the province, whatever. So that kind of entry level into politics is then denied them more so than men, because it's mostly women that often do it to take it on. And then secondly, then having not the school boards, you don't have that local input into what's happening into your local schools. I mean, I was really opposed to the amalgamation in the beginning, you know, when Paris did it, but this is even worse now going to the province, because I don't see that that's going to help the schools at all.
It's absolutely not. And when I went into the school board this morning to 50/50 Young, which is the headquarters, and I was taking the letter to the supervisor, and the letter asks for a meeting with the supervisor, and I was told that the supervisor does not take meetings with the public. So if we're going to now go into a time of sort of permanent supervision, because the ministry is going to be in charge, then who is it that parents and families are supposed to meet with? There's going to be a student community office or something with a couple of staff in it that are supposed to be the intake place. That will not work. I mean, if you look at the number of school trustees in Toronto, there are 22. The only board under this change, the only board that's going to lose trustees is the Toronto District School Board. It's going to be cut from 22 to 12. Stephanie, what have we got? 19 schools in Don Valley West. So that's Catholic, but it's mostly English public. So MPPs are going to have upwards of 40 schools in Toronto that they are, that they represent. So to expect that an MPP is going to do her job, which is, you know, policy at the provincial level, and be able to do the job of representing those schools and being the contact person for school boards, because school boards are going to be so debilitated, is just unrealistic. So it's not going to help anybody. It's going to be a real challenge for the school trustees who are left. And I think that's the point. I mean, the fact is Paul Calandra wanted to get rid of school boards altogether. Mike Harris wanted to get rid of school boards altogether. And I know for sure that there was a debate within the Conservative caucus, and I guess Calandra he half won. So he's debilitating the school boards, but he's not, they didn't do away with them totally, but it is a mess.
Right, because he's accusing them of being corrupt and all this sort of thing. I mean, there was a time when the trustees, you knew, like the principals knew every trustee and so on. Parents could talk to
Yeah.
the trustees if they had a problem. If those 12, you say there's gonna be
It's
12.
gonna go down to 12.
So those 12 trustees are probably gonna get so burned out that they're gonna leave, and then they'd want to have it.
But the thing is, we have to encourage good people to run for those jobs, because the one silver lining in what they've done in education is that another government can build it back by not getting rid of the institution altogether. I'm looking at Stephanie because she'll be in that next government that can build it back. Had they gotten rid of the trustees altogether, it would have been much harder to re-establish the institution, but they can be built back. And just to your point about it being a hotbed or an entry point for women, it's also, I think, perceived by this government as an entry point for progressives,
Yeah.
for people who are concerned about some of the soft issues that have to do with children and families and their lives. And that's not who they want in politics. So I think that's another strategy. Yeah.
Just to comment on the education, the person in power right now, business. And that is the way I see education going. The private schools are flourishing because they're flocking to the private schools.
Yeah.
Getting backing, and I think, my personal opinion, I'm not sure what yours would be, that is the purpose of them destroying public education.
Well, yeah, I don't even know if it's that well thought out. I mean, I think there are people who support the private system, but there are no private schools in other parts of the province. There's 5,000 publicly funded schools. There are 800 of them here in Toronto, but outside, you can't find an Upper Canada College in Thunder Bay. There is no Bishop Strawn School in Meaford. So it's very that notion that it's all about, there are small private schools for sure, but the private schools that we think about in Toronto just don't exist in other parts of the province. So it's a flawed strategy. If that's actually what they think is going to happen, it's just not realistic. They're just going to debilitate publicly funded education, and it's just going to be a lesser system. That's what I'm concerned about.
Well, I have one other comment where
Yeah.
I looked at the girls leaving sports.
Yeah.
Having been a phys ed teacher, and now I have a granddaughter that is an elite goalie at age 16. And the girls on that team and the girls in women's hockey, I watch them, I go to the practices, and to listen to the ambitions of these young women, having been a figure skater growing up with an entirely different world in my world, I am so in awe of what
It's amazing.
young women
Yeah.
talk about, think about, and they're not afraid of being in competition with males.
Absolutely. And the ones who stick at it are very, very strong. That's wonderful. And I think with the WNBA and the PWHL, those are all really good developments. But we still see in high school, the kids drop out, and those are the kids I worry about. I know you're trying to get me to stop talking.
No, stop talking.
Okay. Okay, I've got a couple more minutes. Okay, yeah. And then I'm gonna come to you, to the birthday girl. Okay, yeah.
But when
Okay.
this is talking about the goalie, I was thinking how often we say little girls should be watching the women's teams and all that. And I'm thinking, little boys should be told
Yeah.
to watch the women's teams and
Yeah.
learn from them, by the way. So you put me in mind of three sort of moments in my life. By the way, thank you, I love you.
You're welcome.
The first that came to my mind was when I was at Waterloo in the like 1980. And there was a film that was going around and it was called Not a Love Story. And you were only allowed to watch it in a certain organized capacity. You had to have a group. It had to be, there had to be a particular facilitator who had a discussion afterwards for the young women.
Mm,
And it was very controversial. And there's, a scene of basically a porn movie where a girl had a gun in her mouth. So there was there were
Disturbing,
impactful
yeah,
things in
yeah.
it, right? But they're out there.
yeah,
So this was shown in the context of girls understand. And they played all sorts of recurrent music and what the music lyrics were saying. So they didn't just leave the girls alone with those songs. They said, let's talk about it.
yeah.
And I thought that was so empowering and so
Yeah.
important. So that was a moment.
It's like what has to happen with social media, right?
Yeah.
The online stuff, yeah,
How the internalized misogyny
yeah,
is
exactly,
in there. And if you don't stop and say, hey, wait a minute,
yeah,
that's not something.
yeah.
And so the second moment was Sheila Cobbs.
I'm nobody's baby. I'm nobody's
Oh
baby.
my God. And I remember thinking, where sometimes you just have that moment where
Yeah,
you have awareness. I had an awareness of how much I was dismissing her also, but I was also saying, fuck off.
yeah,
At the
yeah.
same time, and I realized what I was saying to that situation, I was saying.
To yourself, yeah,
Is I want to say something and then I think, that's the
Yeah.
thing.
yeah.
And
You don't listen to your gut, right? Yeah,
And how women in politics, they see big picture with consequences and what happens instead of these things that men just say. Now, they use this wonderful term with Trump, he's an announcement president.
yeah,
He just says a
Yeah.
thing and there's no context, there's no meaning, there's no, well, now what's gonna happen? Like, what does this mean to not educate kids? What does it mean to not? And I'm just thinking, Ford is Trump.
yeah, yeah.
Ford is Trump. There's no.
The long-term
It's
thinking
not even
is
like,
not.
he's Trump. He's not even a Trump led. He's a.
You said that, I didn't. Yes.
I have lived in 6 countries. I've been through 4 different educational systems. And there were 2 women here, you and you. The differences in systems have always been great.
Mhm.
And I was encouraged never to. I was encouraged to express my thoughts. I was 25, and this was in Canada. I worked for a law department in our Trans-Canada Pipeline. And at a meeting, because I knew things, I asked a question. And the head of the department came and said, don't you ever ask a question again.
Wow.
I then went on to study at the university and college.
And you kept asking questions.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And then I was 80 at a meeting. That is where I live. And I asked a question and I was told again, don't ever ask a question.
Just when you were 80?
Yes. It happens.
Wow. Well,
Why I want to bring this up, and I have friends who were, for example, especially one girl who was did the law degree here, and I was also told, go to another country because it's easier for you that your personality wasn't fitting. Oh yes, I was told to go to back. I said I don't speak French. They said, oh, you get along. It was very good. And they are stopped in between by comments. And that's where it starts. They are even going through, I think if they have changed now for the law students or that. but even there.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter where you are. There are people who are being silenced,
Yes.
and that's what I worry
No,
about.
literally they have no fun,
Yeah.
right?
Martha-
Going to
Martha-
thank the speaker now.
Martha just wanted. Yes.
Say something really positive about young girls. I was in Montreal last week. At the convention.
Oh, you were at the
I was
convention.
at the Convention.
Yeah,
And
Martha.
one of the most interesting young women at the age of 15 stood up at a mic in front of 4,500 people.
Wow.
And passed, or it had passed when she finished her comments, a resolution on AI and how it needed to be dealt with in schools. She was representing her riding initially, but she knew exactly, and the rest of us were sitting there thinking, 15, and I thought,
Awesome.
that is a super beginning.
Awesome.
And 25% of the people there were young liberals, so they were from 15 to 25. So if you're really concerned about our education system, there's a whole lot going on, likely outside of the system that's helping these.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the system too, to be
Yeah,
fair. There are good teachers, good
Yeah.
people. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Oh, this was the last, this was Donald Trump. He had a horrible thing he said
Oh.
about Kamala. Donald Trump. Yeah, that's right.
Kathleen, thank you. That was amazing.
It was terrific.
Thank you.
In 1903, in Toronto, a group of women formed our organization. And they were formed in response to intense prejudice. And one of the things that struck me about what Kathleen was saying was we thought over our lifetimes, we've been making steps, we've been gradually improving. And here we are talking about this stuff again, and how frustrating that is. However, what is really encouraging for me and for I'm sure all of us is that you said you can't promise the results, that we need to keep working, we need to keep doing this. You can't promise results, but you can promise that it's worth doing. And I was really impressed with that. I just, yeah. We're so pleased that you were able to come and speak with us, but we also admire what you have done over your lifetime and the way that you have led the way and inspired other women to be able to follow what you have done, to become premier. That's just amazing and so wonderful that we're all so thrilled to have you come and speak with us. You've inspired us to use our freedom to say this is not okay and to say it loudly, but also to inspire us to seize our freedom to act. And I think that's one of the most important things that I heard you say tonight is we can act. So thank you, Kathleen. We really appreciate you coming and speaking with us. That was marvelous.